Okay, thank you for being here. I'm going to introduce our panelists by reading their bios, and then we'll let Chris take off with the conversation. Thank you for being here, panelists. Caitlin, Durante, if you want to just unmute and say hi so people can locate you on the screen.
Hello, here I am. Hello.
Caitlin is a writer, comedian, and creator and co-host of the Bechdel Cast, a podcast on iHeartMedia Podcast Network. Inspired by the Bechdel test, which determines if two female characters speak to each other about something other than a man, co-hosts Caitlin and Jamie Loftus, who is also here with us, plus special guests, examine film through an intersectional feminist lens, one movie at a time. Spoiler, most Hollywood movies do not fare very well. No surprise there, really. The Bechdel Cast has been featured on BuzzFeed, Vulture, the AV Club, and IndieWire, appeared live at the New York Comedy Festival, Brooklyn Podcast Festival, San Francisco Sketch Fest, and the Women in Comedy Festival, and was voted Hoo Ha Ha's favorite comedy podcast in 2018. Thank you for being here, Caitlin. And Caitlin is joined by co-host Jamie Loftus. Is Jamie here with us yet? She may be on her way. Jamie is a comedian, writer, and animator who's written for Comedy Central, Adult Swim, Sci-Fi, and more. She hosts the Bechdel Cast and My Year in Mensa on iHeartRadio, has toured internationally with her show Boss Whom Is Girl, and has baby teeth bronzed and loaded in a gun in case of an emergency. Great. Jamie, thank you for being with us. Cristina Severino, do you want to say hello so people can locate you?
Hello.
There she is. Thank you for being here, Cristina. Spark Up podcast launched in September 2016. It started off with 4 personalities, including co-founder Ruben Caminero, aka Bands, and founder Cristina Severino. The podcast has become a primary platform for people to hold reflect in-depth conversations, promote their unique stories, business, and creative work. They've interviewed various people like Lori Cattell, owner of PVD Donuts, yum, Mayor of Providence, Jorge Alorza, Kimi Amisor, founder and instructor of Afrobeat Fit, rapper Flawless Real Talk, and many more. Aside from podcasting, founder Cristina Severino has a bachelor's degree from Rhode Island College, is an events host, and a mother. Through Spark Up, she's been able to find her voice in conversations in dire need of awareness and amplification. Thank you, Cristina. And then we have Marion Blake Larsen.
Hey guys.
Hello. Hello.
In their impressive studio there, Marion Blake Media was founded by this husband and wife team, Marion Blake Larsen, in 2012. Started as a hobby and way to connect with other people during the early newborn years for their children. MNB Media has blossomed into a thriving business which consists of multiple podcasts, as well as blogs, and boasts hundreds of thousands of page views and downloads per month. Additionally, MNB has an extensive social media reach, employs over 15 writers and editors, and holds multiple nominations and wins for best podcasts in their respective categories. Their goal is simple: make content that is entertaining, informative, and honest. Thank you for being here, Marion Blake. And then Daniel Denvir is also here with us.
Hello.
Thank you, Daniel. He is the host of The Dig, a podcast from Jacobin Magazine, and the author of All American Nativism: How the Bipartisan War on Immigrants Explains Politics as We Know It. So we're so happy to have these panelists with us. Thank you for giving your time today. Our panel's moderator is Chris, host and producer and founder of Let's Chat with Chris Revill. You want to say hi, Chris?
Hello.
And his podcast has been featured in Rhode Island Monthly, Huffington Post, Warwick Beacon, and Vulture, with over 200 episodes and with guests from the world of punk rock, pop culture, and podcasting. Past guests have included Vinnie Horowitz from the Gaslight Anthem, Travis McElroy from the Adventure Zone, and the Bechdel Cast. Caitlin and Jamie, who are here with us. It's a small world of podcasting. When Chris is not podcasting, he works in a psychiatric hospital in Providence and is often tired chasing around a spirited toddler who may or may not make an appearance during this event. And yes, thank you for your question, Joel, in the chat. We will make the recording available, and my email is in the chat, so if you want to hang on to that and send me an email for the rest of the recording, feel free to do that. All right, Chris, I'm going to let Chris start off with some questions here. I'll be back on around 2 to help moderate the Q&A. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Jody. Thank you, everyone at Let's Share Writers Club for the opportunity. We're really excited about this. So the podcasting industry has exploded in both listenership and new podcasts in its short 16 years. Podcasting was developed in 2004 by former MTV video jockey Adam Curry and software developer Dave Weiner. Since podcasts started with virtually no central figure, it was the independent podcasts that built their community and the industry as we know it today. In April of this year, we saw 25,000 new podcasts alone. Currently, there are over 1 million podcasts. These people today come from different backgrounds and found a way to grow and level their podcasts. So my first question for all of you today is, how'd you do it? but seriously, there's with so many podcasts out there, what did you do to start finding your audience? So I would think our first question today, maybe we can start off with Daniel, and we'll go through everyone. What is the first step one should take to find their audience?
Well, it's a good question, one that I really didn't have any clue as to the answer to when I started a podcast. So I don't know if this answer would be very helpful.
I think we're all in the same boat.
Yeah, I started it just sort of as an experiment without any idea that it could become my full-time job. And I had other jobs, more conventional journalistic reporting jobs at the time. And, I initially, I think I did the only podcast that I wanted to do, which is like extremely long and unapologetically complex intellectual discussions with book authors. It didn't occur to me there would be like a big enough audience for that, but I have like probably now about 40,000 downloads, 30 to 50,000 downloads most episodes. And so it's not, if you compare it to like, I don't know how many people are watching like a cable evening newscast or something like the really big podcast, it's not that many, but it's enough that I can get some subset, I guess, around 1,500 to make monthly contribution up to plenty of money for me and to pay my producer and my assistant and everything else. And in terms of finding the audience, I think it was mostly word of mouth, but then affiliating with Jacobin early on what was helpful. When I started the podcast, I asked Jacobin whether they wanted this to be their first podcast. And I think they reasonably said, well, let's see like what you do first. So I did it for a few months and then affiliated, and they had never done a podcast before, but that affiliation and them promoting it on social and whatnot, I think drove attention. But I think overall it's, I really don't put much energy into publicity. Like maybe that's a huge mistake, so it must be word of mouth.
Oh, thank you so much for that's a great answer. Jamie and Caitlin, same question. What would you say the first to find an audience?
I guess for us, we benefited a lot early from there just not being a ton of podcasts like what we were doing. So we were kind of trying to seek out the listeners who were looking for more female-centric movie podcasts, just because there weren't that as many 4 years ago. But Caitlin, what do you think? I think that we also benefited pretty early on from doing guest swaps with other podcasts, and we did early appearances on the Cracked podcast in LA that really helped bring some people in, and sort of just like finding friends and people we already knew who we thought had audiences that would be interested in our show, and and that kind of helped over time.
Yeah, we managed to convince a few comedians mostly who had bigger followings than we did to guest on our show, and then they would like retweet their episode, and then people would find us that way. We also, I think it just so happened that a few of our listeners were journalists who wrote for like the AV Club, and then they would write up about our show like when the AV Club or whatever publications, and then people found us that way. So I don't know how to reach out to I don't know how to get those people to listen to your show. That was kind of a happy accident, but those just little bits of like press, I suppose, and like guests who were willing to tweet out about the show and get some of their listeners their followers to engage with us helped a lot in the early days.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, excellent. I know I've listened to many of your guest appearances on the Daily Zeitgeist as well. So it definitely I think that's probably how I found this. How I found Bechdel Cast. Thank you so much for that. Thank you, Cristina. Same question. What is the first step one you would take? What is the first step one should take to find their audience?
Just like everyone, I think the common factor here is promotion. We've found a pocket in the city where not very many people were podcasting at the time. So we took advantage of that and presented it as this new and exciting thing, even though podcasting has been around long before we started. So we took advantage of that and kind of just built on this hype. And every week, as we got closer to our first, our pilot episode, we just kept promoting it as this new and exciting way of finding information and finding people who were interesting in our community. And through that, we found people sharing and retweeting and just like Caitlin said, using our guests as a way to reach a broader audience. And and it's just word of mouth really, and putting out clips as well that were enticing from the conversation that we had. We like to call them hot takes. So something that someone said that might be controversial, and obviously not too controversial where it offends somebody, but it could be something funny, something out of the ordinary that will draw people's attention to clicking on our link and listening to a full episode, and then potentially listening to every episode.
Thank you. A great answer. Thank you so much for that. Mary and Blake, same question. What is the first step one should take to find their audience?
I think, really fine-tuning your niche as much as you can, because there are already so many different podcasts out there, but the more you hyper-focus on who your ideal listener is, what they're reading, what they're already following on social media, what topics they care about, by really fine-tuning that rather than just having a really broad scope, you're able to create content that suits their needs. And we did not get to necessarily team up with anyone for interviews or anyone for kind of a partnership. So what we did is old school. We were on just Twitter, following people who are searching those niche hashtags that we were searching. And we really worked on the community aspect of creating those conversations and saying, hey, we like the same things and we're podcasting about it. Would love for you to take a listen. And we did that for a good solid first year while we started off.
Maybe
and
even more.
but then they began to share, and we really created this concept that, this is a whole community effort. Yes, we're the speakers on the podcast, but it's a community. So people began sharing, because we've also found that word of mouth is the best way that our listeners have come to find us.
Yeah, and piggybacking off of that, I think the most important thing is facilitating that community. We were just the mouthpiece. We were the two nerds that had microphones in front of our faces. Everyone's voice is just as important, if not more valid than ours. As such, we really found that creating the community and engaging with that community, seeking them out, asking questions, and responding literally to every comment and every that's what fostered the engagement in the audience and how we found our audience.
If I could just add something on really
Please
quick
do.
after listening to everyone else. Yeah, I think it's key to do something that's different. That's a million podcasts, most of which are probably not getting listened to that much, which brings me to the next point. There's no great way to say this, but not to I don't think publicity is publicity will augment the publicity is a good supplemental thing to think about, but the show has to be good and people have to like it. That's the core thing. There are a million podcasts, apparently.
I agree with that as well. Daniel, I think it's important to make something that you actually like. As I'm sure all the panelists and anyone else who's listening knows, you put a lot of time and a lot of energy into making a podcast, and especially those early days, you just have to assume that nobody is listening. Mary and Blake, I actually have one follow-up for you. Is there any examples of what hashtags you were using in those early days? Were they specific to a specific podcast or one of your TV podcasts you were covering or something of that nature?
Yeah, so for those of you who don't know, we cover a lot of topics in the entertainment world, and we are a lot of like fan television podcast related. So we would often be tuning in while the episodes were airing as people are kind of live tweeting along, and we'd be searching those hashtags. If we were interviewing someone from the show, we'd be even searching the hashtag or the mentions for people who follow that particular kind of actor. We have another podcast that is Rhode Island focused, Wicked Roadie. So a lot of that we're actually focusing on Instagram, as people love to snap photos and take pictures and share what they're doing in Rhode Island. So we've been able to comment on people's photos about events that we've talked about on the podcast or we will be talking about. So really kind of just searching those hashtags.
Yeah, and another thing that happened too was our first podcast was actually a parenting podcast, just because we couldn't find a valid, or not a valid, but a source that we liked for parenting issues. We were having a newborn kid who had colic, and what we decided to do was, again, create a place where new parents could go where they weren't. We had a segment called the Judgment Free Zone, where it was just it was judgment free. You could say that you happened to ingest child poop that day by accident, and no one would judge you for it. And it's one of those things that we all talked about. And to that end, we also looked on Twitter and Facebook and wherever for questions. Like, people just had questions, and we would say, hey, we did this episode. It may be helpful to you. And if it is helpful, just let us know. And instead of ending a sentence with a period, you end it with a question mark. That way you keep facilitating that conversation. And that conversation is what creates the relationship between listener and podcaster.
What episode can we go back to find you talking about ingesting poop?
Probably all of them.
All of them. I have a 3-year-old, so I relate to all of that. I'll think that was a great answer. So this is again for all the panelists. Next question, we would think, what tips would you share for finding a niche audience in such a sea of like Spark Up? It's great because you can kind of focus a little more hyper local. Like I know Marion Blake, you said that as well. And then with the Dig or the Bechdel Cast, you're kind of going more for that sea of the millions of podcasts. So I would love to hear everyone's takes. Maybe start in the same order with Daniel and kind of go through how. Let's get nitty gritty into the deep of like what you're doing to find that local community for engagement. Social media, are you doing live shows, guesting on podcasts? What other platforms are you using? Anyone on here today is going to guess a fellow podcast nerd. So let's talk shop. So Daniel, do you mind starting us off?
Sure thing. The way it worked for me was just kind of making the podcast that was the podcast that I wanted to listen to that didn't really exist. There were a few that were similar, mostly shorter. No one else that I know of was doing like breaking very basic rules of podcasting and putting up 2-hour, sometimes 2.5-hour discussion episodes. And so I just, and I guess like my other secret, there's a lot of podcasts, including some that I like quite a lot, are people riffing on things. And I do I take like 5,000 words of notes on a book that I read and do really intensive preparation. And I think that most of my listeners would say that the intense prep shows, and that would be something that's different. And then live shows, I do live shows occasionally. I've found, I don't think they really help the show that much. They're fun to do traveling somewhere. I'm not really sure that they give me, because if I have like 30, 40,000 people listening to a given episode and I maybe have 50 or 60 people at a live show, I'm not, I don't love live shows because then I'm like having to perform for these 50 or 60 people, which I think doesn't make me as good of a performer for the unseen listeners who are going to listen to the live show later. So I kind of prefer to be in my studio by myself. I don't really even love doing one-on-one in-person interviews for that reason.
Spoken like a true podcaster. Thank you so much. Jimmy and Caitlin, same question.
We love live shows.
Yeah, but we were
Yeah,
it's like we were stand-ups already when we started. So live shows, like we were arguably more comfortable doing live shows at the start than the reverse. Like it felt weird to be in a very quiet room and still, so we just tried to make each other laugh and our guests laugh.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think too, I mean, well, we record our live shows, we record the audio from them. So even though it feels like in that moment we're like, oh, there's, only a few people here, it will reach our whole audience later when we release the audio from it. So that helps it feel worth it. And I'm sure we'll get into this further down the road, but it's also like a source of revenue for us. The more we've got, I mean, our first live show, I think we had like 12 people in the audience or something.
And we were like, has anyone ever heard of this show? And like 9 out of 12 people were there by mistake. And one of them was my mom, and she was flirting with our guest, and it was just a nightmare.
Yeah. But
still online though.
But I think our most recent show, the venue was like 350 people, and then we sold it out. So like we've gotten to a point where our audience has grown enough that we're able to sell out larger venues, not the largest of course, but like, we're doing okay, and we're like, it's generating some revenue for us. And yeah, it's that's one aspect of it. And then
I think that we found like success in kind of being, I mean, I think you were saying it as well, Daniel, like being as prepared as possible, which wasn't really, we didn't start that way, because we kind of started more as like, oh, we're riffing from a feminist perspective on movies, but we weren't necessarily like doing the work and doing the full research, which was something that we found over time. I mean, kind of obviously has a lot of added value for our listeners and for us, and just kind of generally makes the show better. So I think when we were able to hone in not just on like, okay, we're really passionate about this and there's a lot of like humor to be mined from it, but actually, doing the homework and being like a resource and not just a commentator, was a cool journey for us.
Yeah.
I think one reason live shows might work so much better for you is because you two are funny and people laugh. And I'm interviewing people about politics and history, and it just doesn't. So
hilarious.
So there's not like there's not like a laugh track introduced by there being an audience that you can benefit from.
That makes sense.
Yeah, we submit to like comedy festivals, or we will be asked. We most of our live shows, or not most, but like a fair number of them have been
early on,
via comedy festivals, because like in addition to, I guess, being a movie podcast with a feminist slant, like we are a comedy podcast, so yeah, we get comedy recognition that way too.
Yeah, we were lucky that we kind of get to double dip in communities where we have the comedy community to pull from, which was really helpful earlier for guests and venues and all that stuff, and then we like slowly became a part of the podcasting community, but we started by just pulling from what we knew.
Yeah.
You did a Bechdel Cast live episode at Brown, I believe. Yeah, I think I was supposed to go, and my daughter got hurt that day, so I didn't get to go. But I remember that. She's okay. It was a while ago, but that's great. Thank you so much for that answer, Cristina. I'd love to hear your thoughts as well.
So when finding your niche, I think you just have to really listen to what your audience likes. See what topics it is that gets them most excited, what makes them laugh, or even sometimes what makes them angry. You tap into those moments where their emotions really come out, whether it's excited or mad about something you said, and reaching out to the community. And especially one thing what we like to do is put up a question about the topic we'll be talking about, and kind of put up a small video on our Instagram and get people to answer us as they know us, as on our personal accounts, and then we'll put our answers on the podcast's Instagram so that people can see all the answers that we've gained, and then they get to hear us talk about it on the podcast. And we have done live shows, and I agree, when you're doing a live show, it becomes more difficult because you are performing for an audience versus just talking on a microphone with your co-host or by yourself. But we enjoy our live shows because people get to interact. I know that for a lot of people, especially for myself, when I'm listening to a podcast, I find myself talking to the people, even though they can't really hear me. So the fun part about a live show is that you get that immediate feedback with the people who listen to your show. And also doing a lot of research on topics so that your conversation doesn't run dry. Because sometimes we think we know what we're talking about, and then we get to that topic and we're like, and then there's those empty spaces, which is like your biggest enemy in a podcast. So you want to have full sound throughout the whole thing. So just keeping engaged, keeping an engagement with your listeners. And also what we found to be successful is reaching out to other podcasts and seeing how they do their topics or how they talk about what we're going to talk about. And we found through doing that podcasts have shouted us on theirs, and in return we have gained some of their audience members. And just reaching out to other podcasters and, you know, being engulfed in the culture, because podcasting is a big culture, and also advertising it as a way of entertainment for people who go to work. We found that people who work are the people who listen to podcasts the most, whether they're on their way or at work. So really just getting to know our audience and kind of learning their life habits and seeing when and how they listen to the podcast and catering to that. And not so much shifting your topics for them, but kind of predicting what they would like. I think that's the most important part. And also doing research on streaming services. For a long time, we were streaming only on SoundCloud. And then we realized that there's a sea of streams, of course, Spotify, Google Play, and Apple Podcasts. So yeah, it's a lot of research, it's a lot of work. And of course, the content still has to be good. So you can do all the research in the world and be prepared for an episode, but if the episode is not entertaining, then, you know, eventually you will lose your streaming and your audience. So just having fun overall.
Oh, thank you so much for that. That was wonderful. Mary and Blake, do you mind answering or anything to add or answering that question as well? You're up.
What's the question again?
I know, I was actually going to have to look at my notes because I was getting so turned into it.
I've been so inspired by other things people have been saying, and I'm like, I don't remember the exact question. I want to make sure that we answer it properly.
That's a great question. I'm trying to find out exactly what I just wrote.
Chris,
What?
with niche audience.
Thank you, Jody.
I think one of the first things, if you're finding your niche audience, make sure that it's something that you care about a lot. Like, you need to make sure that this is something you want to talk about for hours and hours on end, and that you will be able to get super into the nitty gritty of it. Right now, my husband and I are doing a Harry Potter read along podcast. There are a million bajillion Harry Potter podcasts right now. Like, and you know, it's something that we had started because of quarantine starting, and we were just like, what are we going to do? Like, people are reading books, and you know, we have all of these other topics that we cover, but we figured if we love something enough, then people can keep showing up for it. So I think finding something that you care enough about, or that you care enough to learn about. So to go off of what Cristina was saying, like, you want to research, the reason that we started our parenting podcast is because we are clueless. We still are clueless 7 years later as to what we're doing. So because of that, we took our listeners, our niche community on the journey with us. And we were very open and honest that we do not have all the answers, that we are going to interview people, and we want your feedback, and we will try out your solutions because we don't know what we're doing. And I think that having that vulnerability has been really helpful. I think especially in times like today, the time that we're recording, people are very lonely, and to have the the really personal feeling of someone speaking in your ear has been such a great way to connect with those people who care about the same exact things that you want to take that much time to talk about.
Right. And then when you finally find those people that really care about what you want to talk about, and if you've taken the time to learn about it, yes, many of the panelists here have talked about doing live shows. We've done a number of live shows. We love doing it in front of hundreds of people. It's a great time. Not only that, I mean, every podcast episode we do for any podcast show that we have, it's being streamed on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, all live, all at the same time. And it's being put out on the Apple Podcasts. And then you have to understand also, again, who your audience is, what they're looking for. So whenever we're doing the live show, if it's in front of hundreds of people, or if we're doing a live streaming event, which, you know, is in front of thousands of people, you have to be honest with them and say that this podcast that we're doing is meant for the podcast listener, because that's where your listeners are coming from. You don't want to alienate them. So we're honest with the people that are watching us when we say, guys, this is just a
fly on the wall experience, we call it for the streaming. Yeah.
Right.
Like, you get to be here, but really your discussions and your chat thread is your own experience. So keep it going. And if we can interweave it, we will. We'll come back and we'll read all the comments later, but we've made it so that it's like a community thing. So people show up to watch the podcast, but to also talk back to us, you know, and ask each other questions, which has been really cool.
And part of that too is like, we also do listener feedback episodes where, you know, we say, we're going to release the hounds. It's you guys who are driving the conversation, and we're just talking about the stuff that you want to talk about the given subject that we're podcasting about at that moment. So we release the hounds, and that's it. And we have people up on our screen right here that are right behind us. And we do videos and we do the whole thing. But all of that stuff is window dressing. It's great. It expands our reach. And if you can do it, please do it. But it's window dressing. What really matters is creating a show that you're capable of talking about a lot, and making that the podcast listener is taken care of. Have good audio. Like, don't screw that up. You can't, because once, I know before I started making podcasts, if I heard somebody that was, if it was like out over here and you couldn't tell what they were like, no, man, I'm not wasting my time with that. I don't want to do that. And just focus on that. Do the things that matter to what's good to the ear. And as long as you do that, the window dressing will come.
Thank you so much for that. That was a great answer. So another question for everyone. So, you know, podcasting, a lot of work, like we keep saying, and there's so much moving parts and stuff to do. For some of you who have joined a network, or you're teamed up with like a magazine like Daniel, or you, Mary and Blake, just decided to create your own little media empire, or I'm just curious for everyone, can maybe some insight of when should I do I start a network? Should I join a network, or should I go another creative route? And if someone out there like wants to try to get into a network, how do you do that? So any advice, any and all? Daniel, you mind starting us off? Because I know you're partnered with that magazine. So I'd love to hear a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, well, I think it was pretty essential for me, and there was already a relationship because I'd written for them, and, you know, being a socialist podcast, teaming up with a socialist magazine made sense. So it's hard for me to give like more general advice, but I guess if I was to generalize that very like idiosyncratic experience that I had, I would say to look for a relationship that makes sense.
Thank you. Jamie and Caitlin, I know Bechdel Cast is part of the iHeartMedia network. Curious, what was that process? Is that something where you're like identifying who the producers for that company that you go pitch your podcast to, or did they approach you, or just any advice for anyone who's looking for a network, either corporate or independent?
We kind of had a strange journey with a network where we originally were on the How Stuff Works network, which was great. We had done some guest exchanges with people on that network, and we were kind of grandfathered in. And then that company was acquired by iHeartMedia, which is very vast and very scary and kind of easy to get lost inside of. And so we've had kind of a weird journey where, I mean, we started on kind of a small network where we were getting a lot of one-on-one care, and we were still with those people, but then we were like eaten by the huge jaws of capitalism, and where it's harder for independent shows to thrive. So I don't know. Yeah, it's been a strange journey. Like we're well taken care of, and we have resources that we certainly would never have just on our own. But it's definitely been a journey.
Yeah, that is putting it nicely. It's been since the acquisition by this huge conglomerate, it's been frustrating at times. As far as us ending up on a network to begin with, we were lucky enough to be pursued by How Stuff Works. A lot of podcasts will have to pitch to networks and appeal to them and try to like do all the work to get picked up by a network. We were lucky enough to and it was through a lot of our, like Jamie said, our prior like guest partners, like crossover type things, that
and like comedy friends as well.
Yeah, that the people who were running the How Stuff Works network were aware of us and became, listeners of ours. So they approached us, and that's how we ended up with them. So that was really easy for us. I mean, again, we're like everyone's been saying, we put in a ton of work to make the podcast good and to make it something that anyone would want to listen to.
We didn't get acquired until over a year and a half after our shows started. So it was not just like we released 3 episodes and they were like, oh, this sounds good. Like I think we really benefited from, by the time they acquired us, part of the like benefit of acquiring us was we had a fully honed show and we knew what our voice was, and we just kind of had it down. So they didn't really need to do anything other than put us on the network and get us a larger audience. Because we were kind of like a self-sustaining machine already.
For sure.
Oh, excellent. So next, Cristina, there's something I know, networks, and also this kind of leads us into our next topic as well about sponsorships. I know SparkUp has you have a sponsorship through Anchor. So do you mind sharing with us anything about that, Cristina?
Yeah, so Anchor, I'm sure a lot of the podcasters here already know, but if you don't, Anchor is an amazing platform where you can upload all your episodes on Anchor, and it has a bunch of features. You can add transitional sounds, you can add sound effects, you can even add voice messages from fans that follow you on Anchor. And basically, Anchor is a platform that will, what's the word I'm looking for? That will add to all the other streaming. So if you put your episodes on Anchor, it will spread it out to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and any other streaming service out there. And through Anchor, they give you sponsorships depending on your activity. So the more engagement, the more streams, and the bigger your audience gets, the more sponsorships you get offered, especially depending on what time of the year it is. So for example, last year we had, they offered us a sponsorship from a pet shelter, and I believe it was a company for Christmas mugs. And then eventually they will offer you a regular general Anchor sponsorship, which is basically they will ask you to record an ad for your podcast to promote Anchor. And then with every listen that you get, they add money to your account. So you can literally get paid through Anchor, just simply advertising for Anchor. And every person that comes across your podcast, as they listen to it, the money piles. And yeah, so Anchor is probably the easiest way to monetize your podcast. And of course, the more streams and the bigger your audience gets, the more money Anchor will pay you. And like any other streaming service like YouTube or Facebook, when you have a broader audience, it gets kind of difficult that way then to really realize who's part of your niche community. But there is a way to track it through analytics. So you can see the age group, you can see gender, you can see what platform they use, what type of device they use. So Anchor has been a really powerful tool for us, and especially seeing that, you know, we don't really need to reach out and do, I know some podcasts do like Bevel, like they do sponsorships outside of Anchor, but Anchor provides the sponsorship for you. And it's simple. You just record it and add it to your episodes, and you accrue money over time.
Oh, thank you so much for that. Mary and Blake, we'd love if you could maybe give us a little bit of like, you know, at what point did you start to do, it sounds like you started a podcast that kind of grew into a network, into the empires is what we see today. So tell us about it. How did that happen?
Yeah, it is it's actually very complicated and also very simple at the same time. The idea of having a network or joining a network is very foreign to us, and not that we would love to be part of a network maybe someday if it was the right fit. But I grew up in a family where you owned your own stuff and you did your own things and you grew it and you created it. You didn't need anybody else to do it for you. And that what that meant for me was I wanted the control over everything because I'm a psycho and I need control over all of it. Cristina, you were saying that you are on Anchor, which is awesome. I love Anchor, but because I'm such a psycho, I don't want to have one company in charge of everything that I do. So I'm very old school about it. I have my own feeds. I have my own websites. And I have a place where I store all of our own audio. I have another place that hosts the audio. Everything is separate so that if one company were to ever go under, I still have all my stuff. It's mine. And when it comes to advertising, advertising is really important. And like we host our stuff through Libsyn, right? So Libsyn, when you get a certain amount of listens, they, like Anchor, they provide a way to get advertising, and they give us advertising all the time. And you have to be part of the campaigns, and it's national companies, huge national companies, smaller companies. But the best thing to do if you want to monetize your podcast is to get on the phone and call somebody and say, I'm doing this podcast and I have the authority in this particular niche. Would you want to get your message out? And I cannot tell you how many sponsors I've gotten because of that. It's incredible. We for one of our last seasons of one of our last shows, we had a full sponsor for an amount of money that is embarrassing, because I got on the phone and said, this is what I'm doing, and this is the social reach that I have, and we're willing to partner with you as long as the fit is correct, and I believe in your product. And that's a big portion of it. And another big portion too, and I know Mary is probably going to chime in on this, is monetizing your podcast isn't about just advertising. It's too finicky. It's too it's not solid enough. And part of our model is products. You need products. And the only way that you can leverage those products is by developing a relationship with your listeners. And part of those products is something that really, it's the biggest part of our entire monetization.
Have a Patreon account. So between us having our products, which, it's t-shirts, like Blake makes a t-shirt after each episode. Like if we have a funny saying or something, he'll design a t-shirt for that. That's done through, what is it?
That's Spreadshirt.
Spreadshirt.
Yep.
So we'll get $5-6 a t-shirt. So, you're making money in your sleep. We have other products like that people can purchase if they're real fans of the show. Then we have the Patreon option where people just out of the goodness of their hearts can donate, or they get different perks in the different ranks there through Patreon. So with all those things combined, you can't just have just one stream. That's the one thing that we've really found, is you can't just say, we're just going to go for advertisements. And when Blake's talked about the network thing, like, I worked in television before and I didn't like having a boss at all. And that's one of the things that we said, if we're going to do this, we want to be in full control of it. The reason I went into podcasting is because I am a woman. And I did like sharing messages. I didn't like being looked at, and I didn't like being, oh, she should wear this. She should, those are the emails I got all the time. And with podcasting, it's really that intimate voice in your ear. And because of the experiences that I had from higher ups and from being in, more networked television, I said, that's it. We're going to do this ourselves, even if it takes more time.
Right. And we worked hard. I mean, there were nights that we were up till 2-3 in the morning trying to figure out, okay, how do we create this? And this is all with a baby in our arms on a yoga ball bouncing up and down, we needed that time and that extra effort to create the network that is ours. And we are reaping the benefits because of it now.
Oh, thank you so much for that answer. So I know we're getting a little close to 2, so I want to make sure we kind of get to the answer, the thing Mary and Blake really hit on, what we were looking really for, everyone's here for, is how do you make money? So that was wonderful advice. I know would love to hear more from Daniel and the Bechdel Cast, Jamie and Caitlin, about your Patreons or your Matreon, and what kind of offers you think you're using, and merchandise and stuff like that. Any tips? Daniel, would you like to start us off, and then we'll go to Caitlin and Jamie?
Yeah, sure thing. So I have a Patreon and ads. I don't know exactly what the breakdown is, but my guess would be that like 80% of my funding comes from Patreon, and then like maybe around 20 from ads. And the ads are all from like lefty book publishers like Verso, or university presses like University of California Press, or magazines like N+1. And I had to basically sell each of these places not only on advertising with me, but on like advertising with podcasts. Like they'd never done that before. So that was interesting, and it worked out ultimately. Then the Patreon, I have like a few different tiers, and one scheme I came up with was asking the publishers of books whose authors are on my show to send me a few listener giveaway copies afterward. So it's not a quid pro quo. I wait till afterwards and then I ask. If they say no, it's fine. But usually they say yes. And so now I have like a really huge cache of books that my assistant mails to as a gift to people who are $10 or $25 a month donors. And then I have a bigger cache of books that I just buy in bulk from Verso. So I have like a room full of books that get sent out. But I think what really sells people on my Patreon the most is that I try to be pretty clear that I'm like paying other people and not getting rich on the podcast, which would be awkward for a socialist podcast if I were getting super rich. So try to send the humble vibe out. I also emphasize that I don't paywall my stuff, and that I don't paywall anything, so that everyone, regardless of their ability to pay, can listen. But that I can only do that because those of you listeners who can afford to pay and contribute do so at patreon.com/thedig. And I say something like that a lot. And I think that's compelling, especially since there's sort of the podcast builds a sense of community around shared politics. Yeah, I'm happy to say more about that later, but I think that's more or less covers the basics.
Yeah, that Jimmy and Caitlin, can you please tell about your Matreon and any offers that you give people, and you get people to give you? How do you get people to donate?
We had been doing the podcast for probably a year, maybe a little bit more, before we even set up a Patreon, because we wanted to show to our audience that, you know, like there's something we're putting out something worth giving money to.
And at that point we were still like bleeding our own money into the podcast. I think we were like both putting, like, I don't know, we were paying our editor and our producer, and we were just like, oh, this isn't sustainable.
Right.
So
we launched a Patreon, and it was kind of, I mean, it's grown every month since we did that, and being on the network and growing our audience that way has helped us get more Patreon subscribers. So that was a big perk of joining the network. But we just have the one tier. We do a $5 a month thing, and that gives our Patreon subscribers access to 2 bonus episodes every month, which creates quite a bit more work for us. But we also wanted to make it worth it for the people who were able and willing to shell out $5 every month. And now we've gotten to a point where, there's a child. We're making a pretty decent chunk that allows us to like cover all of our costs, and
it also enabled us to be able to pay our guests, which I think is like something in the podcast world that is kind of all like, it's an evolving thing, but we reached a point where like financially we were able to pay guests. So, you know, there's absolutely no reason not to. So that was kind of an exciting milestone as well.
For sure. The way we advertise it, I suppose, is just to, at the end of every episode, we say, hey, join our Patreon if you can. We'll tease like what episodes we are doing. We'll post about it on our social media, be like, hey, do you like, and then we also often have usually very ridiculous nonsense themes that are actually also brilliant when you think about it. You know,
lots of Paddington.
March. Yeah, lots of Paddington content.
Share March. Yeah, there's like a bunch. It's just silly, which is kind of nice too. Is like we have like kind of the community on there. Like we definitely want to build the show so that you can participate for free, and then if you are interested in the Patreon, you know, like either way you can participate. But the Patreon is nice because there is like a little community, and we'll do surveys. We'll let them kind of have some choice over what we cover, which sometimes we overrule, but sometimes we don't. And it started out as a way for us to not have to lose money doing the show, and then kind of evolved into like this nice community where we could give popular fan requests for maybe movies that weren't as popular. It's a little bit looser on our end, and and we'll also offer our matrons like discount codes for merch, and like the first they'll get everything first, and then we'll kind of expand it out to the main feed as well.
Mm-hmm.
I just remember, you just reminded me of one thing that I had a revelation early in my Patreon days, which was initially I was doing like kind of like ads like for my Patreon within the show. And then I realized working in a more natural Patreon pitch into my introduction, like to the whole episode, was better.
Yeah.
And just speaking kind of directly and frankly to the listener.
We've also been experimenting with, we've like just tried this last month, but we've been trying to kind of cross-pollinate those feeds where we like unlocked a Patreon episode and put it on our main feed, and like, oh, if you like kind of this looser discussion, here's our Patreon, take it or leave it, or stay on the free feed. And so that has been kind of fun, and then that saves you a little work too, which is great.
Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you very much. Jody, would you like to chime on in now?
Sure. Thank you to all our panelists. It's such a great diversity of perspectives and experiences. So we really appreciate your input. And thank you to Chris for helping bring all these wonderful experts together, and for your great questions. It is too, we want to be respectful of everyone's time and give the audience, everyone else, time to ask questions. I know Chris probably has plenty of more in his pocket if no one speaks up, but for the Q&A, if you would please use the chat function, just because there's so many of us, that's probably the best way to have your question heard. The chat is at the bottom of your screen, and you can direct it to everyone, or if you'd rather remain anonymous, you can privately message Chris or me, and we'll voice your question. But you can type your question in the chat, and we'll direct it at the panelists. Let us know if it's for a specific panelist. If you have a podcast, let us know what your podcast is, and we'll give it a shout out. And yeah, feel free to write your questions in the chat. We'll try to do our best to get to them all. And hopefully we'll have time for everyone. We'll give it a second here, and then Chris, you can jump in if no one else has a question, but I cannot believe that would be true. Any questions for any of the panelists?
That seems like a question. Actually, one thing we're seeing here from Carrie McKenna, Patreon won't tell me how many followers gets me on the radar for searches. So any ideas of like more how we collect more data about your audience from Patreon?
I don't totally understand how many followers gets me on the radar for searches within Patreon. Do you mean like because I think some podcasts or like some things will be like highlighted on Patreon, and like it's the idea that like the more that you have, like the more followers you have, the more likely you will be to be searchable or highlighted. Is that the idea? Oh yeah, I don't really know anything about that. Sorry.
Oh, that's fine. I'm scanning through them real fast. Oh yes, they were. I guess we'll totally vote. Here's one. Here's a good one from Hillary Jones. For folks with YouTube, what has the experience been like? Live, not live, statistics, audience, etc. I guess for anyone, like I know Marion Blake, you have a video component as well. So what has your experience been like doing the podcast with the video component?
Yeah,
clearly you have the best backdrop of all of us.
Yeah, no, obviously we've invested in our studio, and listen, the YouTube is great. It's amazing, and doing live streaming on all of them is great. YouTube is like, if it's not Google, it's the second biggest search engine on the planet, and everybody goes to YouTube for something, whether it's music or funny cat videos or whatever. And as long as you have the correct tagging, and as long as you're creating a show that you are passionate about, then yeah, YouTube is absolutely for you. You will absolutely get traction as long as you're giving yourself the right titling and giving yourself a proper audio sound. People can forgive a bad video. They absolutely can, but they will not forgive bad audio. So that is my suggestion for YouTube.
And one more tip, if you are going live, whether it's YouTube, Instagram, or whatever, you want to try to have it be a consistent day and time so people can plan on tuning in for it. We use like a complimentary texting service because, as you can see, we both had to leave to go see our kids. Like, this is our life all the time, is with the pandemic especially. Like, we always have children coming in and out. So I will text the listeners, hey, we are going to be recording a podcast, and if you would like to join us live on those sources, this will be the time. We'd love to see you there.
I would add that, I don't do video because I don't want anyone looking at me while I podcast. I like to stretch sometimes, or I don't know, just stare at my computer or make strange faces. But there are a lot of people I found out just in the last year that will listen to just audio on YouTube. So you should post your podcast on YouTube, even if you don't want anyone looking at your face.
Oh, thank you. That's good. I relate to that strongly. So I was like, oh, that was a good one for me as well. Thank you. Diana Crow asked, how have your strategies for growing your audience changed since you launched? Do you want to maybe stick with the format? Maybe Daniel, want to start with that, and maybe if anyone who has any other panelists would love to hear your opinions.
Again, I mean, I should really think more about publicity, but I think it's just word of mouth, and I've had sort of like a steady growth over time. I've done some ad trades. I'm not really sure even how to measure if those worked or not. I've done both like ad trades with other left-wing podcasts and also some magazines to get some things in print. I'm sure they help a little. If anyone has tips for me, I'd love to think about publicity a little more. I should.
What I'd like to say is publicity, Danny, you kind of said word of mouth, and that brought something to me. Early on when we started, we knew that having a relationship, I feel like we keep saying this, having a relationship with your audience is paramount. We were at Podcast Movement, I don't know, back in 2014, I think, maybe 2015. It was I think it was the first or second one. And we had this epiphany where we said, we have all these people that are listening to us because we worked hard. Let's just ask them if they want to help. Let's just ask. And if they do, awesome. If they don't, what does it matter? So when we first started, we said, okay, but if you guys want to come write for the blog, or if you want to help with social media, or if you want to help with email chains or anything, and that's how we ended up getting people that write for us and do everything. That's how that all got spread. And as soon as you do that, then the word of mouth continues to spread.
I can add to that as well. When we first started our podcast, what we would do is whenever we posted something on Instagram, DM it to everybody, direct messaging, and we found that to be unsuccessful. People don't like to get spammed with information. They kind of just like for the information to be at their leisure. So, the more you post on your own podcasting profile, the more obviously people will see you on their feed. But I would suggest to not directly direct message people on Instagram or Facebook, because that has caused us to actually lose followers. We found that to be very unsuccessful. So I would just put out as much content as you can, of course, quality content on your profile, and not force it on people.
One thing I guess I figured out that was surprising to me that I'll add is that I used to make more of a point of reaching out to sort of left-wing celebrities, assuming that would drive more traffic to a show. And I found that I'll get as many listens from just really popular episode with a less well-known scholar as I will by bringing on like a Bernie type, person.
We found that to be true as well, where I think for a very long time, our most popular episode was Caitlin's best friend. Like, it was like...
Who is not famous. He has like 12 Twitter followers. Like, he was our least famous guest, and it was our most
But he was our best, like, it was just a really funny episode, and we're talking about, like a feminist Twilight perspective for 2 hours. And so we originally sort of assumed that guests would be driving the podcast, but the longer, which was true a little bit in the beginning, but the longer we were around, the more we found that people were genuinely coming for either usually for a specific movie, because they liked it already. And then which gives us more freedom to give lesser known people a platform and talk about a movie they're passionate about. And it works out for everybody.
It also gets to a point where, like, I mean, I'm sure this is very obvious, but like they come for you, the hosts, like you establish a rapport with your audience, and then they like you, they want to hear what you have to say. So people they come for us, in addition to other stuff they like. People
everyone should follow JT on Twitter. He doesn't really tweet that much.
Oh, thank you so much. We have a great question from Tony. Apologies to anyone if I mess up your last name. Wersh, maybe. Are there any treasure troves of open source software that have helped you or your tech buddies improve your podcast and video cast? Oh, yeah. Oh, I love that. That's a good tech question. I know for a lot of us getting into it, like me, like I love to talk, but then learning the tech could be tough. So Love that. Any feedback from anyone? Mary Blake, you want to field this one?
Sure. Yeah, there's actually a ton of stuff. You want open source material to make a great podcast, it's GarageBand. That's where it begins and ends. A lot of people use Audacity. Audacity is really good too, but I like the user interface of GarageBand a lot better. We right now, it's not open source, so I can't recommend it, but we use Adobe Audition, just because that's the way that I like it. I get, again, the control aspect of it. But if you want to do the live streaming and you want to live stream to multiple sources, yeah, you can absolutely do that all at once. There's a bunch of different things you can do. You can use Ecamm Live. Yeah. You can use another web-based application called Lightstream, where that will go to Facebook, it will go to Twitter, you can go to lula.tv, that will also do Instagram Live, that will do Facebook, that will do YouTube, that will do Twitter, it will do all of it all at once. And as long as you have the bandwidth for it, you can stream to as many nerds as you like. That's what it comes down to.
Also for what we have used is Headliner. That's a website. I think they have an app now, but the app doesn't have as much capabilities as the website does. And Headliner is basically a way to promote your clips or promote your episode. You can even upload the full episode, and that way you can put it on YouTube. You can add captions, you can add music and different sounds. And it's really a nice website to kind of make things look more presentable, give more eye candy, I guess you can say, for your listeners. So Headliner has been very, very helpful. Also, we've used in the past this software called Wirecast. Wirecast is a bit more expensive, but it is one of the best softwares we've ever used. And it's really primarily for people who are looking to enhance their video. But like Mary and Blake, you can have something very simple, and that works just as well, especially when it's aesthetically pleasing. So Wirecast is more, just to add things, kind of to make it look more like a TV programming type of deal. And it also gives you the capability to stream to multiple platforms.
Oh, that's wonderful. Great question we have from Diana Garcia. When do you think is the best moment for looking for a sponsor? Caitlin, Jamie, want to start us with that
one? We did not take on any sponsors until we were already on a network. So I don't really know. I mean, we prefer to, sponsorships are so weird. So once we got onto a network, they will basically try to get you to promote literally anything. And you don't, there's a lot of not great products and services out there that you don't want to just slap your name on. So yeah, we don't really have experience courting specific sponsorships, but we do have a lot of experience just doing our due diligence and really researching the places that were pitched by a salesperson, because they're not going to tell you like, hey, this company doesn't treat their workers well. This company has like a bad manufacturing practices. So we really try to thoroughly research and vet anything that we are attaching our name or our show to, which results in lost revenue. But it's like we don't want to be promoting products that we don't actually believe in or want free samples of.
Totally.
Any other panelists have any tips on if they've had to pitch to sponsors at all? And if not, we can always just jump to another question.
Yeah, I mean, I just, in my show's case, I thought about what sort of ads would sort of make sense to my listeners and be sort of on vibe with the overall show. And so since I was talking to mostly authors of books, I pitched book publishers, and it wasn't so much like an ethical question, like that I didn't want to like push Casper mattresses. I own a Casper mattress. I don't believe there's ethical consumption under capitalism, so I'm not really hung up on that. It's just like it would sound weird to my listeners if I was pitching a Casper mattress or Squarespace. So I was like, okay, what can I do? Because I would like ad money. So I came up with, I tracked down advertisers who I thought would be interested, and they were. So I imagine that would work with a variety. Like if you have if you have like a parenting podcast, I imagine there are tons of stuff that parents get sold.
Also too, like just looking around you in your community, like I'm from Providence, so I have a lot of friends who have their own businesses. I know a lot of entrepreneurs, and we've built relationships personally and on the business side. So basically I will pitch them a package deal and tell them, hey, I think our audience would really love your product, and you can make up something like a code or like a discount code that our listeners can use, so that way you can track who's actually buying the product from the advertisement. And it's just another cool way to keep track of your audience and their interests. So I think it's important to build business relationships, even if it's not for sponsorship reasons, just so that you have those bigger networks or other networks that you can reach out and grow your audience with.
I think another thing too, when we were starting off and we didn't yet get money from advertisements, I would often say, I really want to try your product, or I really like your product, especially if it was an Etsy person, if it's hyper focused on something we were podcasting about or a parenting topic. I would honestly say, if you send me, some of these spoons and bowls, I already love them and I can talk about them from firsthand experience. I don't necessarily need money. And a lot of people, especially if it's a more local business or a smaller, privately owned business, they'll be happy to do that, because then you can actually even take the pictures, or, have that real experience about the product. So if you're starting off, that's another good idea.
Yeah. As long as, Daniel brought it up earlier, where it's like, you got to be pitching the right things to the right audience. You're not going to pitch auto parts to a parenting podcast, or you're not going to be pitching glow sticks to a TV podcast. You're just not going to do that. And I think the question that started off was, when do you do the pitch? When do you know to do it? And none of it's worth it unless you've built a good relationship with your audience, because you may be able to convince some guy to give you money for it, but he's never going to come back if it doesn't produce results. So if you don't have your listeners trust you and trust your opinion, then no one will ever buy the products, and then you'll lose the relationship with the person that gave you the money to advertise.
Oh, thank you so much. We're gonna start combining a few questions in one to make sure we try to get everyone's what they're looking for. So, any tips on pitching to networks, and what does a network do? Is there anyone who can speak to that? Okay. Maybe Jamie and Caitlin, I know you're on larger networks and you've been on How Stuff Works. Do you mind sharing us what a network does and how someone could pitch if need be?
Yeah, as we already mentioned, they're the ones, there's like a whole marketing and ad team who are the ones who are responsible to going out to advertisers on our behalf and trying to figure out generate interest in different products and services that might be interested in us. And then we have to go back and say yes or no, whether we would be interested in having them sponsor us or, them buying ad space on our podcast. So they handle all of that for us. They also, as we were joining the network, they were helping to facilitate the growing of our audience. So they were making sure that we were guesting on other podcasts on the network to make sure that people knew about our new podcast or our podcast joining the network. So they did a fair amount to just kind of bring awareness, I guess, to us having a podcast now on the network. And we did really substantially grow our audience through that.
Kind of overnight. Yeah, it was wild. And they also facilitated a few, it wasn't just inside of our own network that we were doing guest swaps. They were doing ad switches on like Earwolf and like a few other networks that, you know, they basically approached other popular movie podcasts and were like, okay, can we do an ad read exchange for that? Which, I mean, I don't know for sure, but I think if we, you know, it would have been a little trickier if we just cold reached out to a larger podcast. And I think sometimes coming from some vague bureaucratic email, you get more of a response, which I don't love, but has generally been the case for us.
They also do all of they partner with TeePublic, which is a site that does merchandise stuff. So they facilitate all of our, Jamie does the designs for all of our merch and then uploads them to TeePublic, and then like TeePublic handles all of the orders and shipping and all of that. So we were, for a while, we were doing our own merch. All we had access to was like stickers and buttons, and then I would like have to take them to the post office and like package them up and ship them out. But like now, because of this partnership with TeePublic, although we could also, like, if we weren't on a network, you could just use TeePublic on your own. So that's like a tip for people. But we didn't think to do that because we didn't know any better.
We were just mailing stuff.
We were just like making stuff.
We have like days, packing days and stuff like that. It's been, and then back when we could record at their facilities, they provided like a nice facility for us to record, which was nice. And then, you know, but now we just do it from our, you know, I think this time has been a great equalizer for everybody, because we lost our free snacks and we're trapped in our homes.
Yeah, they all, in addition to like the facility,
also free snacks,
the recording equipment and all of that. If we wanted to, also we could have taken advantage of like we could have had them write a theme song for us. Like people, like they hire people. If we wanted to, they would have designed our merch. They would have edited our podcast for us. So they provide a lot of the staff, but because we were already such like a well-oiled machine when we joined the network, we were like, we have all that stuff, brag. But in theory, that's something that a network would provide or should provide.
Yeah. Oh, wonderful. I think we have a great question from Carlos Camacho. When starting out, how much research was enough? I'm a social scientist working on a PhD, so used to do research, aiming for a media show with an academic bend. So how much research would you say goes into it before you record your first episode? Say, Mary Blake, you want to field that one to you? Anyone else can jump in afterwards?
Yeah, that's a really big question. Research is a very big term. So if you're talking about research about the subject to which you're giving comments, then do all the bit of research that you possibly can. Absolutely. I would say in terms of starting a podcast or learning, if you are thinking about doing one, just do it. If you're not, I remember talking about this with Mary years ago, like if you're not embarrassed by your first 15 to 20 episodes, you're not doing it right. You have to be embarrassed by your first 15 or 20 episodes. So yeah, you may have bad mics and you may have crappy, transitions or bad intro music. Just do it. Just get it done.
Just to get it started. I think, when you're talking about the research, if you're thinking about starting a podcast, one of the things that Blake and I did before each podcast that we'd have is we'd say, do we have 50 to 100 topics that we can podcast about? Like, you need to make sure that you've got a list of things so that you don't run, unless you want it to be a season podcast or a boutique, short 10 episode podcast. If you want it to be an ongoing thing, sit down and really say, do I have enough information? Do I have enough topics that I can be talking about? And then, press record.
Since my podcast sounds somewhat similar to what you're looking to start, in the sense that I mostly interview academics. The research that I do is I read the book, which actually I think makes it stand out from a lot of other podcasts where people who write books are interviewed, and take really extensive notes. And then I work a long time on kind of architecture of of how I would see the questions play out. I somewhat script the questions, and I think I've gotten pretty good at making it sound like I'm not reading. But yeah, I would say that if you're going to talk to academics about their work, really just closely reading their work and taking careful notes on it makes a lot of difference.
I would say the most important thing when researching is just looking for different platforms that suit your podcast. And then the rest you learn as you go. You kind of have to just apply yourself and just do it. I think the most research that needs to be done is your equipment, making sure that your podcast sounds good. And of course, that's all trial and error. When you do it is when you learn how to and what sounds best and what software is best for your sound. But also just doing really, especially like on my podcast, we talk about pop culture and celebrity gossip and things like that. So we like to do thorough research in the person or the celebrity in the news, and just get different sides of the story so that we have a full conversation. And, we're not just talking from our opinion, but we're also talking from knowledge, real knowledge, credible sources that are out there. And YouTube. We get a lot of our research done with YouTubers, podcast experts that have done it for years, and just seeing really what works for you and how you want to run your podcast. But research is important. The work is important, because after a while, just talking just to talk will not work, because like someone mentioned before, that if you're not embarrassed by your first 10, 15 episodes, then you're not doing it right. And that's absolutely correct, because you will find that you want to start a podcast, but you're not really quite sure what your niche is yet. So you kind of just have to do it and take a leap of faith and start. And then as you go, you will find your niche, and sometimes reimagine it and reinvent yourself every time.
Oh, thank you. What wonderful, thoughtful, wonderful questions from everyone. We want to apologize if any of the questions we didn't get to. We do want to be respectful of our panelists' times. Feel free to reach out to any of us on social media. Podcasters are a group that love to talk, so myself included. Find someone who's doing what you like, and then ask them for their time, and I promise you good things can come from that. Before we, as we wrap it up, I'd like to ask our panelists, do you have any advice for anyone listening today who wants to start a podcast, or who's maybe in podcasting, and any tips to level and grow? Maybe we can start with you, Daniel. Any closing word?
Can you skip me and then I'll come back at the end? I need to think of something.
Sure. Who feels ready to answer that first?
I'll say, if you're just starting, know that it's going to take time. Have patience with yourself and enjoy the journey. Don't expect the money. Don't worry about the download numbers right away. Know that if you have 10 downloads and they keep coming back each week, those 10 people spend an hour with you in their earbuds, so don't look at numbers in a bad way. Really just focus on making the best podcast, the most informative or educational or just, exciting podcast that you can. And I promise you it will continue to grow, but don't worry about the money and stuff right away.
And yeah, money, you're not going to make a ton of money doing podcasting unless you're Joe Rogan or whoever. It's just not going to happen. You can make money, you can do it, and if you work hard, you will earn a lot of money. But Mary brought up a great point. If you got 10 listeners, those are 10 people that have decided to put you in their ear. Learn about them. Talk to them. As soon as someone makes one comment, please, for the love of God, say thank you. And ask them a question, learn their name, learn where they're from, learn their favorite pet's name. Whatever you got to do what it takes to establish a relationship. If you do that, you've done right.
What I would say is make sure that your energy is right when you're recording. I found some days that I'm maybe not in the best mood or tired, that I'm not vocalizing correctly, and everything you feel kind of sort of translates through the audio. So if you're not in a good mood or if you're not in good spirits, the people will hear that. So what I would say is, if you do your research and your quality is good, then you really have nothing else to worry about but except projecting your voice correctly and making sure that your audience enjoys you and enjoys your voice. So what I would say is, do the mental work as well. Come ready to have fun and have a good conversation so that, like Blake said, people are taking the time to listen. And sometimes podcasters go on for 2 hours. So it needs to be enjoyable. So bring your A game and come with good energy so that people can enjoy it.
Cristina, if I may, I just want to add one more thing to actually jump off what you said. Don't over edit. Please don't. Just get on the mic and talk, because people can hear the edits. And if you make a mistake, leave it in. It makes you more personable. Mary and I, when we hit record, we do what's our music, transitions. It's all live to tape. There are fumbles. We screw things up. Just make it natural. If you over edit it, it becomes robotic and nobody wants to listen.
I would suggest record like a couple practice episodes that you don't, maybe they're good enough that you'll release them, but probably not. So just like when you're first starting out, if you've not started yet, if you have a co-host, like get you and your co-host together, whatever, but just like record a practice episode or two, just so you can figure out your structure, figure out your format, figure out the pacing and the energy and all of that stuff. Just because you recorded a thing doesn't mean you have to release it. There have been a few episodes that Jamie and I have recorded where this is going to ever see the light of day. So, and there's even a couple episodes that we have taken off of our feed because we're like, wow, we did this 3 years ago and it was very bad. So let's
those early episodes.
Yeah, so we removed those a couple of them recently. So yeah, like it's just and with anything, practice makes perfect or makes less not good. So practice a little bit and just figure out your groove, figure out, and that's, the first like 15 episodes are probably going to be crummy. Ours were not great, certainly, but if you do a few practices, maybe that's only 12 that aren't great.
Yeah, and then I would also say kind of quality over quantity with episodes too. I think sometimes it's like when you're trying to build a following, you're like, oh, maybe I should release, like more episodes a week. And it's like, keep in mind what your bandwidth is. You don't need to burn yourself out over a podcast that's like, don't cause yourself pain for no reason. We've generally found it to be better to just spend more time preparing for a topic that we really care about talking about and want to have fun with. And generally that'll get a better listener response anyways than just like, pushing out 3 episodes really quickly just to hopefully get the metrics. So don't kill yourself trying to podcast. It's
That's a horrible reason to die. I mean, there are lots of bad reasons to die, and that might be the worst of all. Yeah, totally embarrassing. There was a while where I was like, oh, I'm going to do a bonus episode like every other week, and then I was like, actually, I already give people too much content. Actually, people are always catching up with my episodes. Actually, I can take a week off and no one's going to be mad at me. Actually, I used to have I don't even have a particular day of the week that it comes out anymore. For the first year and a half, I was like very intent to get it out at like post at like Tuesday night at like 11 or something. And then the first time I was late, it was like very psychically troubling to me. And then no one cared. And now I don't care. And it's a big relief. And then I would say, I mean, for me, over prepare, but that might not be necessary for everyone, but that's like how I go about things. And yeah, like I think everyone said this, but just keep doing it and you'll get better. I sound so stilted when I go back and listen to my earlier interviews, but people even like those, even though they're totally horrifying for me to listen to now, and I don't do that.
Oh, thank you to all of our panelists, and I'd like to throw this back over to Jody.
Thank you, Chris. I really appreciate all the time you put and thought you put into your questions and for coming up with the idea of the panel in the first place and bringing these wonderful, talented podcasters with such a wide range of experience. Thank you to our panelists for your time. We are all so grateful for the advice. The panelists' podcast, the links to their podcasts are in the chat, or just reach out to me, Jody, at whatcheerclub.org, and I'm happy to direct you. Listen and subscribe. As you can tell, they're the experts. Thank you again for being here. I was telling Chris as we were preparing, the one thing that makes me sad about virtual events is we don't have a chance for that networking and chit chat afterwards, which whenever we put on events for podcasters always is a little bit louder than our events for writers. And we do miss that. We miss you. Please stay in touch and reach out if there's other ways that the club can support you. Thank you again. Let's give a silent round of applause for our podcast panelists. Thank you so much. And I wish everyone a happy weekend. Happy podcasting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, this was fun.